Jerusalem was filled with people, travelers from many places, gathering for the Passover festival. Excitement was in the air. Whispers spread quickly through the crowds. Jesus is coming. Many had heard about him, the teacher, the healer, the one who had even raised the dead. Hope began to rise in their hearts. Could this be the promised king? As Jesus approached the city, he did something unexpected. Instead of arriving on a war horse, he chose a humble donkey, a symbol of peace, not power. As he entered Jerusalem, crowds gathered along the road. People laid down their cloaks, placing palm branches in his path, a royal welcome. Voices began to shout, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." They believed this was the moment their long-awaited king had come. But many did not yet understand the kind of kingdom Jesus came to bring. He had not come to conquer nations, but to change hearts. Not to take power, but to give his life. The same voices shouting Hosanna would soon cry out something very different. But on this day, hope filled the streets of Jerusalem. The king had come, gentle, humble, bringing peace. And the greatest story ever told had begun its final chapter. Jerusalem was filled with worshipers, people who had traveled far to honor God. At the center of the city stood the temple, a sacred place meant for prayer, peace, and the presence of God. But when Jesus entered, he saw something very different. The outer courts were crowded, not with people praying, but with merchants selling animals, and money changers calling out loudly. Coins clattered on tables, voices shouted over one another. The atmosphere felt more like a busy market than a holy place. Animals were being sold for sacrifice, but many were taking advantage of worshipers, charging unfair prices, turning devotion into profit. The temple, meant to be a house of prayer, had become a place of business. Jesus saw the injustice, and his heart was deeply troubled. This was meant to be a place where people could come close to God, but instead, it had become a barrier. Slowly, Jesus began turning over the tables of the money changers. Coins scattered across the stone floor, rolling in every direction. He drove out those who were buying and selling, clearing the courts with authority. "My house will be called a house of prayer," he declared, "but you have made it a den of robbers." His actions shocked many, but they revealed something important. Jesus cared deeply about what was right. He cared about justice, about honesty, about true worship. The temple was meant to bring people closer to God, not push them away. After the crowds had scattered, the atmosphere changed. Where noise once filled the air, there was now space for prayer. The blind and the lame came to him, and he healed them. Even in correction, Jesus showed compassion, because his mission was not to condemn, but to restore. And through his actions, he reminded everyone that God desires hearts, not just rituals. True worship comes from within. As evening fell over Jerusalem, Jesus gathered with his disciples in an upper room. They came to share the Passover meal, a sacred reminder of God's faithfulness. But this night would become one of the most meaningful moments in history. During the meal, Jesus did something unexpected. He rose from the table, wrapped a towel around his waist, and began washing his disciples' feet, the task of a servant performed by their teacher. Jesus showed them that true greatness is found in humility and love. They had shared many meals together before, but this night was different. Jesus knew what was coming. The hours ahead would change everything. The disciples did not yet understand, but they could sense the weight of the moment. As they sat together at the table, Jesus looked at the 12 men who had walked beside him, learned from him, shared life with him. He knew the road ahead would be difficult. Yet his focus was not on fear, but on love. Jesus took the bread, gave thanks, and broke it. "This is my body given for you." Then he lifted the cup. "This is my blood, poured out for many." In this moment, he revealed that his sacrifice would bring forgiveness and new life. Jesus was helping them see that a sacrifice was coming. Not one forced upon him, but one he willingly chose. A sacrifice for forgiveness, for restoration, for hope. Jesus grew troubled and said, "One of you will betray me." The disciples looked at one another in shock. Judas quietly left the table, stepping into the night. The path toward the cross had begun. Jesus made a new commandment. Jesus spoke gently to his friends, "Love one another as I have loved you." By this love, the world would know who follows him. After the meal, they sang a hymn and walked into the night toward the Mount of Olives. Ahead lay prayer, betrayal, and sacrifice, but also hope that would change the world forever. It was late at night. The city had grown quiet, but inside Jesus, a storm was rising. He walked to a place called Gethsemane, a garden of ancient olive trees, a place of peace, but this night felt heavy. Jesus knew what was coming: betrayal, pain, the cross. He told his friends, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow, even to the point of death." The weight of what lay ahead pressed down on him like never before. He asked them to stay awake and pray with him, but exhaustion overcame them, and one by one they fell asleep. Jesus walked a little farther, alone. He fell to the ground and began to pray. "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." He knew the suffering ahead would be unbearable: the physical pain, the rejection, the loneliness, and the weight of the world's sin resting on his shoulders. The anguish was so deep, so intense, that his sweat fell like drops of blood onto the earth beneath him. In that moment, Jesus felt the full cost of what love would require. Fear pressed in. Sorrow surrounded him. The path ahead seemed unbearably dark, but still, he chose obedience. Through trembling breath, he whispered, "Yet not my will, but yours be done." He chose love over escape. He chose sacrifice over safety. He chose the cross for us. An angel appeared to strengthen him, but the road ahead would still be hard. Soon, footsteps would approach through the darkness. Betrayal was near, but the most important decision had already been made. Because in the silence of Gethsemane, Jesus said yes, and that yes would change everything. The night air was still heavy as Jesus finished praying. In the distance, footsteps approached. The quiet garden was suddenly filled with the flicker of torches and the sound of armed soldiers moving through the trees. Leading them was one of his own disciples, Judas, someone who had walked beside Jesus, someone who had heard his teaching, seen his miracles, shared meals with him. But Judas had made a choice. For 30 pieces of silver, he agreed to betray the one who trusted him. As the soldiers drew near, Judas stepped forward. Jesus looked at him, not with anger, but with sadness. Judas greeted him like a friend. Then he kissed him on the cheek. The signal had been given. The soldiers moved in quickly and seized Jesus. In the confusion, one of the disciples tried to fight back, drawing a sword. But Jesus stopped him. "Put your sword away," he said. "This must happen." Even in betrayal, Jesus chose peace. Even in injustice, he chose love. He could have walked away, he could have called for rescue, but he didn't, because the path to the cross had already been chosen. And even as Judas betrayed him, Jesus remained faithful. The night was growing darker, but the story was only just beginning. Through the darkness of the night, Jesus was led away, taken before the religious leaders. The chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders had gathered, determined to find a reason to condemn him. They had already made their decision. Now they searched for words that could justify it. Many spoke against him, but their stories did not agree. False accusations filled the room, yet no truth could be found in them. Through it all, Jesus remained calm. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He did not respond to the insults. The high priest finally stood and demanded an answer. "Tell us, are you the Messiah, the Son of God?" The room fell silent, waiting. Jesus answered simply, "You have said so, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power." His words struck the room with force. At this, the high priest tore his garments in anger. "He has spoken blasphemy," he declared. The council agreed. They said he was guilty. They declared him worthy of death. The decision had been made. Some began to mock him. Others struck him, covering his eyes and demanding, "Prophesy, who hit you?" Cruelty filled the room. Yet Jesus did not resist. Though falsely accused, he remained steady. Though rejected, he remained faithful. Through the blows, through the stinging rejection of his own people, Jesus didn't fight back. He looked past the palace walls, past the mocking faces, toward a hill that awaited him at dawn. The path toward the cross was now unfolding. And even in injustice, the purpose of love was moving forward. Peter had promised that he would never leave Jesus. Even if everyone else fell away, he said he would remain faithful. But that night, everything changed. After Jesus was arrested, fear spread quickly among his followers. The danger was real. Peter followed at a distance, watching as Jesus was taken away. He stayed close enough to see what was happening, but far enough so he would not be recognized. In the courtyard, people gathered around a small fire. The night air was cold. Peter stood among them, trying not to be noticed. A servant girl looked closely at him, studying his face in the firelight. "You were with him, weren't you?" Peter quickly replied, "I don't know what you mean." Someone else recognized him. "You are one of his followers." Again, Peter denied it. "No, I am not." Voices grew stronger, more certain. This man was with Jesus. For the third time, Peter spoke firmly, "I don't know him." At that moment, a rooster crowed. The sound echoed through the night. Suddenly, Peter remembered what Jesus had said, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." Then Jesus turned and looked at Peter, not with anger, not with condemnation, but with understanding. Peter realized what he had done. His heart broke, and he left the courtyard, weeping bitterly. But this was not the end of Peter's story, because failure is never the end, when grace is still to come. As night turned toward morning, Jesus was led away to stand before Pilate. The path to the cross was unfolding. Jesus was brought before the Roman governor Pilate. The religious leaders stood outside, their voices sharp with accusation. "He claims to be a king." Pilate, a man caught between the power of Rome and the fury of Jerusalem, looked closely at the prisoner before him. He saw no army. He saw no weapons. He saw no threat. Pilate asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest. But now, my kingdom is from another place." "So, "You are a king," said Pilate, listening carefully. Jesus calmly replied, "You say that I am a king. For this reason I was born, and for this reason I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." The noise of the crowd suddenly rises. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate stepped out before the people and looked at the crowd. He saw no crime, no guilt, no reason to condemn this man. Searching for a way out, he offered them a choice: Jesus or Barabbas, one innocent, one guilty of violence. But the crowd did not want justice, they wanted an ending. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" The pressure of their voices rose like a tide, threatening to drown the governor's conscience. Pilate poured water into the basin and washed his hands. "I am innocent of this man's blood. It is your responsibility." Yet the weight of the choice remained. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Even in the face of injustice, Jesus remained silent. He did not fight. He did not resist. He walked willingly toward the cross, the only king who would wear a crown of thorns so that we might be free. The King of Truth is rejected so that we might be accepted. The verdict had been spoken, yet the silence of the king remained. He was no longer standing in a palace. He was walking toward a hill. The soldiers saw only a task to complete. They placed the heavy wooden beam upon his shoulders, rough timber, resting against wounded flesh. The weight of the cross now rested on the one who carried the weight of the world. Step by step, he walked forward. The streets of Jerusalem filled with noise and confusion. Voices rose from the crowd, some watching, some mocking, some unsure of what they were seeing. Days earlier, they had welcomed him with praise. Now, the atmosphere had changed, yet Jesus did not answer their voices. He looked toward the ground. The dust of the earth he had once formed, now beneath his feet. The Creator, walking among his creation, carrying the burden of redemption. The weight was heavy, and the journey long. His strength weakened, and he stumbled beneath the cross. A man named Simon, pulled from the crowd, was commanded to carry the beam behind him. A stranger, suddenly part of the greatest story ever told. For a moment, the Savior allowed another to share the burden. Not because he lacked strength, but because he had chosen the path of humility. Among the crowd, women wept at the sight before them. Jesus turned toward them, compassion still in his eyes. "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children." Even now, his concern was not for his suffering, but for the hearts of the people. He walked forward, knowing the cost, knowing the purpose, knowing the victory that would come. Ahead stood the hill called Golgotha, the place of the skull. Step by step, he drew closer, not as a victim, but as the Lamb who came willingly, not defeated, but determined. The journey of sorrow was leading to salvation. The King of Truth carried the cross so that the work of redemption could be finished. Jesus reached the hill called Golgotha, the place of the skull. The journey had been long, the weight of the cross heavy, yet he did not turn back. The crowd gathered, some watching in silence, others unable to understand what was unfolding before them. The King of Heaven stood beneath an earthly sky. The cross was raised, not as a throne of power, but as a symbol of sacrifice. The one who spoke peace to storms now endured the weight of suffering. Hands that healed now stretched wide in love. The world looked on, yet few understood the moment. Even in pain, Jesus spoke words of mercy. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Love was stronger than hatred. Grace was stronger than sin. Mercy was stronger than judgment. In the darkest moment, The light of compassion still shone. The sky grew dim, and the earth fell quiet. Creation itself seemed to pause. The one through whom all things were made was giving everything, so that we might be restored. Hope seemed hidden, but heaven was at work. And when the moment had come, Jesus spoke again. It is finished. Not a cry of defeat, but a declaration of victory. The work was complete, the price was paid. Love had made a way where there seemed to be none. The cross was not the end, it was the beginning. The cross had done its work, the sky had grown quiet, the crowds had gone, and now there was silence. Carefully, gently, they took the body of Jesus down. The one who had spoken life now lay still. They wrapped him in linen cloth, with care, with sorrow, with reverence. A tomb, cut from stone, unused, waiting in the garden. They laid him there. The entrance was sealed. A great stone, heavy and cold, rolled into place. It seemed final. It seemed complete. Hope felt distant. The voices that once followed him were now hushed by grief. The disciples waited, unsure, uncertain, afraid. Had the promise failed? Had the story ended? The world held its breath. Silence filled the garden. But even in the silence, God was still at work. Even when nothing seemed to move, the promise remained alive. The stone was set, the tomb was closed, but heaven was not finished. The silence was not empty. It was waiting for the moment when everything would change. The world held its breath. For 3 days, silence was the only answer to the cross. The king was still. In the quiet of the garden, hope felt distant, hidden behind the weight of a great stone. Everything seemed finished. Everything seemed lost. But darkness was never the end. It was only the waiting. The silence was not defeat. It was preparation. The work was being completed. The promise was unfolding. Even in the stillness, life was stirring. Then morning came. Light touched the garden. The stone was rolled away, not so he could escape, but so the world could see. The tomb was empty. The linen cloths remained, but Jesus was no longer there. Death had been overcome. Life had triumphed. Mary, he spoke her name, and in that moment, everything changed. Sorrow turned to joy. Loss turned to wonder. He did not return as a memory. He stood as the living one, the firstborn from the dead. They looked to the cross, no longer a symbol of defeat, but a sign of victory. The grave could not hold him. Sin could not claim him. Death could not keep him. He is not here. He is risen. The cross was the beginning. The empty tomb is the promise fulfilled. Love has won. Hope is alive. And because he lives, we shall live also.